Ah, did I catch him?
Maybe.
I tried to catch you. That was my goal.
Have a good show.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Dragon Plus live stream. As we do every other week, it is the Design Plus live stream with Jeremy Crawford.
Hi everyone.
The lead designer of the Player's Handbook and lead rules designer of Dungeons & Dragons. How are you?
I'm doing well.
It is October 2nd, which means the Crows have returned to Renton, Washington and Wizards of the Coast.
Yes, several of us summon them each year.
I was going to say, so apropos to the Crawford
yes.
component of your name.
You remember that?
I
Nice.
do.
Yes.
I do.
Yeah, it is thought that my name might have something to do with a place that had crows. That's one of the possible interpretations. But I also just love crows and ravens for their associations in folklore.
Yes. Cooler animal. Crow/raven, octopus.
Crow or a raven. And which many people don't know, crows and ravens are not actually the same thing. Many people use the words interchangeably, but a raven is actually a larger bird than a crow is. And most of the time when people see a bird and they call it a raven, it's actually a crow.
But crow and raven, that's where we get craven from. No.
I don't know, but that's a nice job of doing a folk etymology.
I'm a big fan of NPR's Says You, and you kind of give out your fake definition for words.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm going to stand by that.
Yeah.
I put out a question in advance. It is October, which means by the end of the month we'll be getting towards Halloween for folks that celebrate that.
My Halloween decorations are already up.
You and Shelley both.
Yeah. I cannot get enough of Halloween.
Yeah.
So we put our decorations up the last day of September so that we get to have them up for the entire month of October.
I thought we were being early because Shelley is freaking out that we had to get them up this weekend. And I'm like, it's still like the beginning of the month. She's like, no, we need them up now.
Every day of Halloween decorations is a better day.
I think we talked last year about favorite costumes, but the memory eludes me. Did you have a favorite Halloween costume growing up?
I had two, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
As a kid, I had many costumes, but my two favorites were one year I went as a wizard and one year I went as a witch.
Oh.
And my very first Halloween costume was witch.
Ah.
Yeah, my mom, she asked me, in kindergarten what I wanted to go to school as, and for Halloween I said, a witch.
Yeah.
So she sewed me a black dress and put on a black cap, and away I went. And I had a scary green mask.
Oh, yeah. How old were you? First grade, second grade?
This was kindergarten. So
Kindergarten,
I
okay.
was 5 years old.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. I'm working on the Extra Life Adventure, and it does have, it's a spoiler. It may or may not have a hag in it.
You know that I'm going to like it.
That's why I put it in. It has a hag and a unicorn.
Oh my gosh. I am winning in every way.
As an homage. There's the first chapter there. So,
is it a hag riding a unicorn?
it's a spoiler if you're going to run it, but they're sort of they're head to head against each other.
Oh, nice. I like it.
Yes. But they don't like each other very much.
And then do you get to decide if you're on Team Hag or Team Unicorn?
Exactly. So.
Ooh, that would be a hard decision for me.
Yeah.
That's why I want
Whose team would you be on?
Golly, I'd have to meet the Hag and see if she's nasty enough and funny enough, I might go with her. But otherwise, I'll go with the beautiful unicorn.
The hag has big antlers, like a stag hag, and she lights candles and puts them in her antlers.
Oh my gosh,
That's
great.
Sway you to Team Hag?
Oh man. No, it's a hard choice. That's why I want them to become friends and have that amazing hag riding the unicorn, and I'll join their combined team.
We'll have to put that in as an option. I bet Emmy could do a illustration of that. That would come out really nicely.
Yeah.
Sean Wood did the hag illustration.
Oh, I
I'll
haven't
show
seen
that
it
off.
yet. Yeah, I have to see it.
Yes.
Everyone here is like, can we please talk about Unearthed
I did this.
Arcana?
I know. I did this last week. I was showing something off screen, which folks can. While I'm rooting around my folder for this, I will mention that yes, we will be talking more Unearthed Arcana this week. We did get your questions from last time, but if you do have new questions, we would love to get those in. I know they're getting collected in chat as we speak at the moment. Please do preface them with question, and we'll get to that. Well, this is. We also talked about candy last year because we had our candy corn discussion. Yay or nay? And I remember. I know your answer.
What is my answer?
Your answer is the wrong answer, which is yay.
Oh, yes. In fact, as we were preparing, I love it. I'm looking at the stag hag. Fantastic.
And that's the skunk hag and the mole hag.
Well, I can't wait for everyone else to get to see this illustration Bart just showed me. But yes, Bart, you'll be horrified to know that as a part of our Halloween preparation this past weekend, we did buy a bag of candy corn.
I feel sorry for the children on your block.
Oh, this isn't for the children. This is for us.
Well, then that's okay. Has there ever been a candy that you were excited to eat as a kid based on expectation and it turned out to be nasty?
Oh.
I'm thinking for myself, I remember distinctly getting into the cupboard and there was a bottle of vanilla extract.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, this smells really good.
Yeah.
It has to taste great. That and I think it's like baker's chocolate, which is like unsweetened chocolate.
Yeah, not good.
No, terrible.
I had that same experience with vanilla extract because I loved vanilla ice cream as a kid.
Yeah, it smells great.
And yeah, what a disappointment. Because I thought that little bottle was essentially just like a magical elixir of like, you could just drink little droplets of vanilla ice cream. No, that is not what that is.
I would put circus peanuts into that category as well. Those orange things that look like they could be palatable, but then no.
It's sort of flavored styrofoam.
But like badly. Sorry for the circus peanut producers of the world, but it's awful stuff.
Especially when you could be eating something yummy like candy corn.
Cocoa powder. That's another good one in here. I'm a big believer in the garbage coconut from like Mounds and Almond Joy, but not everyone shares that opinion either. So.
Wait, you like that?
I love it.
Oh well, see, I love coconut, and so even bad coconut,
right.
Like coconut has to go really bad for me to not like it. So no, I'm with you. Mounds and because Almond Joy also has coconut in it, right?
It does. It's the same. It's basically the same thing with like one almond on top, and then they
really went all out.
They could call it a whole new candy bar. I'm going to jump into some questions.
Please do.
While everyone is patiently waiting, but then I'll jump back into
while we make everyone want treats.
Our nonsense here. From last time, I did want to, as mentioned, we do collect all your questions. I liked Roger B's question. What do you feel is the best way to deal with action economy when a player, who takes to my heart here, casts Conjure Animals at a high number? They are spreading chaos around the game table. It's bag of beans this, it's bag of tricks that, it's Conjure Animals. How do you, advice for managing action economy when it's nutso?
So if you end up with a entire zoo of creatures on your battlefield, I recommend DMs take a look at the optional rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide on running large groups of creatures. There's advice there on reducing the number of die rolls you make for them, essentially treating them almost like a collective creature, and you kind of abstract out how much they're doing. Now, if your group, especially at a home game, is cool with all of that detail, then go ahead and play every single one of those animals. This is one of those things where I think DMs, it's really good to just get a read on your group And if everyone, if they are there, they signed up for the minutia, for the tactics, go for it. You know, move the squirrel, move the wolf, move the bunny.
I would say with the caveat that you're being careful that it's not the one player who has the 20 animals. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it's like, well, this turn is going to take 10 minutes. And then everyone else gets shortchanged as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. Because most people don't like playing the sidekicks to another character. But I said most people and not all, because it's important that we don't forget that there are people who do actually like playing that role. There are people who enjoy being a supporting character. And thankfully D&D is flexible enough that it can provide that role as well as the opportunity for people to shine. We also have advice in the Sage Advice Compendium on Conjure Animals specifically, and several of our other conjuration spells on essentially the DM's ability to intervene on what shows up. That essentially the conjurer can send out into the multiverse their desire for what shows up, but what actually shows up is ultimately up to the dungeon master.
It shows up, it just immediately runs away.
Well,
not to the tenets of the spell.
Right,
it's like,
right.
well, it's just, they fail a morale check or something.
Yeah. and so DMs, if a spell like that gets abused a lot, then remember you have the ability to intervene. I don't recommend intervening and actually making the spell less effective.
Right.
I would just say, you know, if they asked for a bajillion small creatures with low CR, well, maybe it's a few higher CR creatures.
Sure.
And you know, basically try to give as much as you can to the player based on what they've expressed is their desire, without bogging the entire game down for everybody else. The other thing I recommend is if, again, the whole group they are ready for this to be, you know, Watership Down or fill in the blank movie of just animals everywhere. Although I hope it ends up, your adventure ends up happier than Watership Down.
Never read it. I know what happens. Not a great story.
It's a sad story.
I couldn't do it. I would never get through that one.
Keep in mind, you can also have the other players at the table play those animals. There's no rule that says the person who summoned the creatures and the DM are the only two people who can control those animals. No, the whole group could divide them up. Like, let's say you summoned 8 creatures and there are 4 players at the table. Well, each person could control 2 of the animals, making the choices of what they do. You know, again, following the rule for what's possible in the particular spell you're casting. But I'm a big fan of a group really embracing the fact that they're playing a co-op game and sharing the fun, sharing the decision making, especially when you end up with some effect that creates a bunch of individual moving parts. That's basically begging for your friends to jump in and help you manage your menagerie.
Somewhat related question. This came in chat now, but I picked it up from last week. Trolls Maiden. What creature would you like to play? From the Monster Manual, from Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes, I'm assuming from Vola's Guide as well. What would you like to play, and what would that creature have for class? Their preferred is a pixie barbarian.
Oh, a pixie barbarian.
So this is sort of a new creature, perhaps, that hasn't been implemented as a player race.
Oh, okay. So, all right, I'll set aside any creatures that are already playable.
Yeah, we're going to take those out.
I think something like a pixie or a sprite would be fun.
Yeah.
Particularly because you can fly, you have magical abilities, you're very small, which would give a tall person like me a different perspective on the world. And maybe a sprite bard.
All right. You didn't go unicorn.
I was tempted. But, so you know what stops me? No opposable thumbs. As soon as I imagine being a creature that doesn't have opposable thumbs, I'm like,
You don't think their horn could be very dexterous? And like,
maybe, but it's like I would almost need my brain to forget that I know what it's like to have fine manual dexterity.
Yeah.
Because again, I said this as a person, I spend my life typing and writing, and just suddenly that not having the ability to do that sort of thing with one's hands.
We have like a kickboxing class here at Wizards of the Coast that I've taken from time to time, and it always kind of amuses me that for humans, we have these amazing tools to do these I'm going to write and all these, or I'm just going to curl it into a ball to wallop somebody with, and just brute force this wonderful tool into a fist.
It has amazing versatility.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Let's ask another question here. Ikanunam asks, can psionic spells be counterspelled?
That one is easy. A spell, regardless of its source, is a spell to the rules. And so unless a rule tells you otherwise, a spell can be dispelled by dispel magic. Being a spell that has a psionic origin doesn't change how that spell follows the rules.
Okay.
Just as being a divine spell doesn't change the rules versus being an arcane spell. Really, the origin of a type of magic in 5th edition is a story layer, and it does influence, based on the game's legacy, the types of abilities we tend to associate with that sort of font of magic, whether it's arcane, divine, psionic, or something else. But at the end of the day, regardless of source, a spell is a spell is a spell in terms of how the rules treat it. And one of our motivations for that in the game is to keep things simple. So you can focus on the action, the storytelling, and often what will distinguish a spell that's very divine versus one that's very arcane versus one that's psionic is what it does, or what it looks like, or sounds like, or feels like when it's doing it. And then, of course, you also have a lot of magical effects in the game that are shared, because there's such a kind of universal type of magic that all of those different flavors of magic have access. But if you imagine some of the divine-themed spells we have in the game, not just healing, but things that are more specifically divine, like spiritual weapon or your spirit guardians, that sort of thing. Those spells have a very different feel from the wizards like Arcane Eye, or a number of the other spells that appear on, say, the wizard or sorcerer or warlock's list, but not on, say, the cleric or the druid's list. Again, same principle applies to psionics. If we were to introduce a full-fledged psionic spell list, it could include on it, like if we were creating a psionic class, but that used spells, you can imagine that list would have spells on it that exist on other classes' lists, but like our current classes, would also contain some spells that aren't on other classes' lists.
All right, so there you go. It functions as spells do.
Yes.
I've got one more question before we get to some of the live questions here. If we talked about, we've been going through a bit of the Unearthed Arcanas from the last week. We hit Bard and Paladin last time. We touched upon Sorcerer and Warlock. As part of Sorcerer and Warlock, we did talk about the new Mind Sliver. A question came in at the end from Mustacholis. If you were hit by multiple Mind Sliver spells, would the number of D4s stack?
They would not stack. And the reason for that is we have a rule in the player's handbook in the chapter on spellcasting. The rule, if you're looking for it, is in a section called Combining Magical Effects, and it tells you that if you are affected by multiple spells of the same name at the same time, you are subject to the effect only once. They don't compound or stack, to use the term we usually use in gaming. In contrast, if you if you threw two different spells on a person and those two spells had similar effects, those would stack. So the key is always, the question to ask yourself is, do the spells have the same name? If they have the same name, they don't stack. If they have different names, then they do stack, unless some other rule tells you otherwise. And that really, I often will say, whether here on the show or at a convention or sometimes on Twitter, I will sometimes say, unless another rule says otherwise. I actually chuckle inside a little bit every time I say or write that, because given the fact that our game is an exceptions-based game, that, unless a rule says otherwise, is a universal principle in Dungeons & Dragons. It actually never needs to be said, but we do say it to remind people.
You can put that on the end of every sentence in the game.
Exactly. Yeah, every single sentence of rules in Dungeons & Dragons could end with "unless another rule says otherwise," which is why we, in the Player's Handbook, touch on this in the introduction of the book, where we talk about, you have general rules, and then specific rules can override the general rules. But again, we say it sometimes just as a friendly reminder, but I'm bringing this up now to actually also remind everyone that principle is true even if we don't say it. Basically, blah, 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 rule, whatever it is, and always imagine at the end there is this little ghostly phrase, unless another rule says otherwise.
That's a good shirt we could get you, with just that phrase on it, unless a rule says otherwise.
And again, I always love it when, like on Twitter, if I give a rules answer and someone will bring up one of those exceptions. They'll be like, but what about?
Yeah.
And again, you can actually in D&D, but what about pretty much everything, because that is the nature of an exceptions-based game.
All right, we've got some live questions coming in now, but before we do, I did want to get a bit of housekeeping out of the way. We have Dragon Plus is available now. Issue 27 is out on our new updated app. Hopefully you're finding it a little bit smoother and more stable of a reading experience, which was our intent. We are rebuilding the archives from previous Dragon Plus issues. We put up number 2 from this past Friday. We'll continue to build them out over time as quickly as possible. We decided to build from 1 up as opposed to backwards for various reasons. Mainly because some later issues reference earlier issues, so it wouldn't make sense otherwise. So, but hey, it's a blast to the past. It's been around for 4 years now, and
Where did the years go?
Where did the years go? The Dragon Plus live stream has been around for 2 years now, so it's. I feel like it just started. I feel like everything just started there. Extra Life is underway, as I've been mentioning. Thank you to everyone who has participated in any capacity. I know that the race into Avernus hit the finish line yesterday at October 1st, and I believe it was won by the fine folks at D4. I'm 90% sure that is a true statement, so congratulations to them. But again, thank you for all of the groups that were willing to participate and for everyone able and willing to support them. So thank you. Yes, we have our one raffle for today as a thank you for everyone who is spending an hour of their time to join us live. I think, yes, this is on the screen in front of Mr. Crawford. We have our rather large, this is Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. This is an unpainted Kraken, so if you would be willing to take a shot at painting this bad boy, it's yours for the taking for whoever wins today's raffle. Just please put in, I believe it's open, and it's exclamation point. Oh, TK told me what the code is.
This creature is wonderfully horrifying.
Kraken, of course, it's exclamation point Kraken. So yes, so good luck to everyone for that. I do love a crowd. You like a hag and a unicorn. I do like a tentacly thing. I like the octopus over the What the hell was the animal that we were talking about?
Ravens and crows.
The ravens and crows. I'll take the octopus, and unicorns and hags. I also like the kraken as a big baddie, which is also in the adventure we're working on.
Oh wow! Everything is in here.
I know. I have to make my shout outs when I could. It's not just a kraken. It's a Thessal kraken. So Thessalar has created a new creepy creature.
Very cool.
Thessal kraken. You have questions. You've been diligently submitting your questions. I'm just going to grab a few at random, if that works for you.
Yeah.
Or did you want to touch on Unearthed Arcana first?
Well, we covered pretty well, I think, our most recent UA options. I know we kind of dashed through the Aberrant Mind, Sorcerer, the Lurker, and the Deep, but let's bring on the questions.
All right. I'm just grabbing a few adventures with Dad. Ooh, this is a good handle. Recent question in one of their game sessions. Our wizard would like to use silver coins for the animate object spell. Are coins considered tiny objects? Could you animate a coin?
They are tiny objects.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yes.
Tiny is a very open-ended size category, because essentially in our size categories, when it comes to the rules, once you get below small, it's basically everything smaller than small is tiny. Keep in mind, our size categories are not a precise expression of measure. They're game categories. Tiny on the low end and gargantuan on the high end basically just scoop up everything in the case of tiny that is smaller than small, and with gargantuan, it's everything that is larger than huge.
Elwarius, welcome, and thank you for playtesting the adventure in question. Has a question on the topic of design. Is there a formula for when I feature a spell, the verbosity? When does it become too verbose? When is the wording exact? Like, is there a formula for the exact amount that you want to put in there to make it just right?
So there is no formula. Really, the number of words you want to use to present a rule is determined by the rule that you are presenting. I know that sounds a little circular, but the reason why I put it that way is each rule is special. Each rule requires whatever explanation is necessary to make it as clear as possible. One of the reasons why we playtest is to find out, are we clear enough? And if we're not, that often means more words, although sometimes it can actually mean fewer, because you can reach a point where you are saying so much that you have actually made it more difficult for your reader to understand what's going on. I
fall into that category personally, so
and often the way to address that is see which extraneous words can you cut. Now, if you get to the point though where you realize all of these words are necessary, then what you might need to do is structure those words in a way that is more user-friendly. This is why you will occasionally see in some of the class features we present subheadings, where, and in fact, in some of our recent Unearthed Arcana articles, we did this. If you look at the Unearthed Arcana on the Sorcerer and the Warlock, and you go to the last page, the Warlock's Unleash the Depths ability has two sub-abilities essentially with their own names. We did that because we didn't want the material to get lost, and basically we were writing enough words at this point that we wanted to make it as user-friendly as possible for the reader to see, there are these different parts. We also will use bulleted lists occasionally to call out, all right, here is this menu of options, or a list of possibilities for the reader to see. Again, to recap, how many words you use, it's determined by the rule you're writing, and playtest. Playtesting includes both playing it at the table, but it also means getting people other than yourself to read it, because other people will discover gaps in your explanation that you often won't realize are there, that they're there. Think of a time where you've written something, and especially if it's something that is near and dear to your heart, there's almost always something that is so obvious to you that you just forgot to mention it. Because for you, it's sort of an of course, but often it helps even just having one other person read it. They will often help identify for you that thing where it's like, oh, I just assumed everyone knew that.
Which is true in fiction writing as well.
Yes.
Which is, I have this visualization of the world, the story I'm telling in my head. I'm communicating as clearly as I can on the page, but there's an assumption of knowledge I have that the reader might not, and has no idea what's actually taking place.
Absolutely. Other thing I would say is be cautious of sentences that go on and on and on and on and on. Often when I'm revising my own design or somebody else's, I will break up a rule into multiple sentences because it can be very tempting, especially if you've ever been in a position where you need to make something as concise as possible. You can kind of get into a mindset where you pat yourself on the back because you think, wow, I crammed 5 concepts into one sentence. So it turns out that is often not helpful for especially rules writing. It's good to try to keep the sentences in your rules focused on a clear, actionable concept and not dump a bunch of different things, especially if they're things that don't relate directly to each other, into the same sentence or even sometimes into the same paragraph. Use paragraphs to separate out different ideas. This is a great example of how what you learned in your English composition class will actually help you be a better rules writer.
Or you just take out every other word. I find that really shortens sentences.
Yes, it would shorten the sentences. I'm not sure it will result in usable rules.
Well, no, but there you go. We've got some many questions coming in, so thank you. And again, I know I say this often, but we do collect them all. We do look to collate them for future Design Plus episodes. So if we do not get to your question this time, we will as soon as we can. Here we go. Bigamesh asks, can the Warlock's tentacles, speaking of Lurker of the Deep, the Warlock's tentacles from Lurker of the Deep use your reaction for an attack of opportunity?
Wait, what is the question?
Can the Warlock's tentacles from the Lurker of the Deep use your reaction for an attack of opportunity?
Well, if it could, that would be right there in the feature. And we have not given you that ability. Now, if the tentacle were presented as a standalone creature,
there we are.
Any creature in D&D has the option, again, unless a rule says otherwise, of making opportunity attacks. This tentacle is not presented as a creature, and so again, unless we specifically give it the ability to make opportunity attacks, it does not have that ability.
Man, I'm trying to remember. Sean Wood had the worst punny joke for that. The Decapus. Do you remember the Decapus from? It was from the Turtle Package. It was one of the monsters.
Yes.
And it was oh God, how do you make a Decapus laugh? You give it tentacles.
Oh God.
Tentacles. I don't know. Not my joke. I'm moving on. I'm moving on as fast as I can.
Oh boy.
Boop-a-da-boop-a-da-boop-a-da-boop-a-da-boop.
I just saw in the chat
Here we go.
that someone has rightly identified that I am indeed mortal. Last time I checked. But I that is not something I actually test in terms of how much I can survive.
Yeah. Because you've survived that pun. Zach Norman asks, question about death saves. Do death saves reset upon stabilization? He's having trouble interpreting the language in the official rules. Oh boy, every time I get the question. For example, if I fail a death save and my fellow party member stabilizes me, but I take damage, what happens? Do I resume my state of bleeding out and making death saves, get an automatic fail from the unconscious attack, or begin as though I had just been knocked to 0? So I'm assuming the question is, you're dying, you're making your saves. How does making or failing the saves interact if you're still getting pounded on?
So the relevant bit that you'll want to look for is if you go into the rule on death saving throws, look at the second paragraph, last sentence, where it says the number of both, in this case it's referring to successes and failures, is reset to 0 when you regain any hit points or become stable.
Okay.
So yeah, as soon as you stabilize, your number of failures and number of successes resets.
You get punched again, you
start over.
Start over.
Yep.
Boy, this your character sounds like they were really knocked down into the corner then and getting beaten badly. Let's see. I'm just grabbing a few that I'm coming. Gaius Octavian Alere asks, does the spell Gaseous Form prevent one from being grappled?
Does Gaseous Form?
If I am gaseous, can you grapple me?
Huh. Let's check it out. Let's look at the spell. And the reason why I'm looking at the spell is we don't have general rules on what it means to be gaseous. And
I could tell you.
I am resisting the urge to make jokes about legumes. So we have to look. This is a case where we have to look at the specific thing to find out what does the game say. We have a flying speed while we are a gas. We have resistance to non-magical damage. We can enter and occupy the space of another creature. You have advantage on strength, dex, and con saving throws, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can't attack or cast spells. So, as written, you can be grappled.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out, like, there's the as we've spoken about many a times, the sort of the story component of that. So you're not necessarily a mist, like a completely intangible mist.
Right.
You do have some physical structure.
Exactly.
A billowing cloud of you, and maybe, and I suppose if you're not necessarily getting headlocked, but if your opponent is using capes or cloaks somehow to corral you, I could see a case being made in that regard as far as how could I possibly be grappled? They're corralling you in some way.
Right, and one of the clues in the spell that you are not entirely incorporeal is that the spell gives you resistance, not immunity, to non-magical damage. So this means there is still something there. You can imagine that if a person extended their hand into your gaseous form, there would be some resistance.
Right.
It is not just simply a vapor there. You are essentially, you're described as a misty cloud, but then the spell tells you what that means. This often happens in D&D spells, where we might refer to something that we're familiar with, like in this case, a mist or a cloud, something we're familiar with in the real world, but then the spell tells you what it means by that word. And so here the gaseous form spell tells you, this is what this means for this spell. A DM, of course, can go beyond what's described in the spell and feel free to lean on your knowledge of the real world. But at the same time, it's not wrong for a DM to just stick with what's described in the spell. Magic is weird and wonderful. And always remember, if you start thinking too long about some of these spells and how they might function in our world, remember, they don't function in our world. They are written for a multiverse where their physics is essentially magic, and many things are possible that would defy belief in our world.
I'm paraphrasing because I skipped by this one. Could a Warforged, we have, coming out next month, we have Eberron Rising from the Last War.
Good grief. It is next month.
I know. Yes, we're going to have a preview in the next issue of Dragon Plus. It's the end of October. I'm like, I don't want to give too much away. And then realized, it's coming out. Really
Yes.
soon. It'll be in shelves very soon. Yeah. So could a Warforged replace its skin if suitable materials become available?
It is funny you ask that, because that ability is actually a feature of the final Warforged, something that was not present in the Wayfinder's Guide, but in the final version of the Warforged, there is the ability to clad yourself in armor.
Well, there you go, Draven Dresden. You have...
they got a spoiler.
You got a spoiler, yes.
Yeah.
You've prognosticated a component of Eberron. Could it be any material?
So the racial trait focuses on using armor.
Okay.
But a DM, of course, could work with a player to go beyond that. Player-facing rules often have pretty clear boundaries. And we do that primarily so that it is easy for a player to get the expected result. What I mean by that is the more complex something tends to get in D&D, the more likely the DM is going to need to get involved in adjudicating that rule. And so the more straightforward we make a player effect, the easier it is for a group to just let that effect work as written. And the reason why that's good is not because we're obsessed with following the rules, it's because we want people to have that wonderful feeling of satisfaction that their character works the way they expect them to work. And again, you start actually increasing the likelihood that something will not play out the way the player expected, the more complex it gets. Of course, in D&D, our expectations can constantly be thwarted by die rolls, but that is a big fun part of the game that I talked about with Greg Tito in our recent Sage Advice episode. That is very much a feature of D&D, not a bug, that we can often communicate our intent for our characters, and this is even true for the DM, communicate intent for something, but as soon as you're rolling dice, all of our intentions can get scrambled in wonderful ways.
Follow-up question, also from Draven. Opinion question. What is the scariest lower-level monster, in your opinion?
Oh, scary low-level monster. I would say one of the scariest low CR monsters is the ghoul. Because being paralyzed at low level with few, if any, ways to actually get rid of that condition, terrifying.
I'm going to go with Sturge, just from the, again, the visualization of a giant mosquito bird coming at you and like, ugh, yeah, Sturge.
Back in first edition, I had a character in the Temple of Elemental Evil. Not that I wasn't playing the character, I was the DM. Walked into a room of Sturges under the Temple of Elemental Evil, and that character had a very quick death.
Oh, they didn't put on their bug spray. You can't do that at dusk.
Yep.
Let's see. There's a wealth of riches here. I'm going to throw out just a couple of topics as I go through these here. So a question on disarm and dropped weapons, a question on Avernus and obtaining magic items, a question on...
Let's do what was the one on disarming and dropped weapons?
Essentially, I think this is it was the very first question of this episode, so I guess fair is fair. We've started from the top. Majestic 2K1 asks, what's the point of disarm for a fighter. What's the meaningful implication if a creature can just pick up a dropped weapon?
So the most effective use case, if say you're a fighter and you're a battle master and you have the ability to disarm somebody using a maneuver, the most effective use case is you knock it out of their hand and you immediately pick it up. Because remember, you can pick something up using your free object interaction or using your action if somehow you disarm them by some other means. This, of course, would be not with the maneuver, using it the way it's typically used. But yeah, again, if disarm them and then pick that puppy up. That is the main way to ensure that they don't just immediately regain use of whatever it is you knocked out of their hand. Also, keep in mind that your friends can pick it up. This is, again, it's a theme I hit on often. Remember, you're playing a co-op game. It can be very easy to sometimes miss the implications of your abilities if you're only interpreting them through the lens of what your character can do as an individual. Remember that in battle, your character is almost never alone. If you are, you may be in really big trouble. You have buddies, and set them up. Maybe if you're unable to pick up the thing you knocked out of your foe's hand, it's possible that one of your companions can pick it up.
Or you could disarm your companions to make it extra. Just challenging for them if the fight's going too easily. I'm trying to see if Obtuse Anglos is still in the chat. You had a question regarding the DM's Guild and proceeds going towards accessibility. If you could give me a DM, a direct message here in chat. I'd love to kind of talk with you on the sideline for that one and get you the information that you might need. We have questions on designing fun encounters, the art compared to the science. We have questions on, there we go.
Let's do the fun encounters one.
Okay, so here we go. Where are we? Boy, they're coming in so fast.
I like questions about encounter building because encounter building pertains to all of our D&D games.
Yes.
That is anything but corner case. That is main case.
Peckable Dan, not impeccable. He is peckable. So I guess going back to the crows. Encounter design and balance seems very much more an art than a science, even when following the rules for difficulty, experience, budget, etc., etc. Your advice on creating fun and fair encounters for players?
So my main piece of advice is, first off, don't get thrown by how we named things in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And here's what I mean. We call them encounters. In some ways, that already sets you on a shaky path, because it can be very easy to think of, in gaming, where we are trained to think of encounters as fights, to think of you're just predetermining who's going to go up against each other in a fight. Now, of course, the English word encounter doesn't have to mean a fight. And so that's what I want to lean into. Think about scene design, not encounter design. You are creating a scene. Think if this encounter, this scene was going to be a movie, is it going to be exciting to watch? Now, that excitement doesn't have to come from the creature mix. Is there an interesting, set of combat abilities? The excitement can often come from it's in an interesting location. It involves a surprise. Maybe an NPC will reveal something during the fight that no one expected. It can involve some great jokes. It can involve something that's really scary. Get your thinking beyond, and that's again why I love this question, because I can tell the person asking it is already thinking in this way, of get your thinking beyond that balance, that right mix of CRs, and start thinking about what's just going to be amusing in the movie of this game for people to experience. And often you can have an amazing encounter, an amazing scene in a pretty generic dungeon room with 3 goblins if those goblins are hilarious, or they disclose some piece of information that no one expected, or they are uncommonly clever. Because remember, as DMs, you have an extremely powerful tool at your disposal when you are running the monsters in a scene, and that is you get to decide how effectively they use the tactics available to them in the game. You roleplay the monsters. Always think, is this monster actually smart enough to use the rules to the best effect? Would it actually be more interesting in this scene if the monster was kind of a lousy combatant who maybe does not do the most optimal thing every time? The flip side, they're up against a character you know in the story to be brilliant. Well, then surprise the players by having that character using the tactical options available to them to the utmost. Those changes alone, how you handle the monsters, rather than what are you doing with the numbers and whatnot, can often have a more powerful effect on keeping people engaged and entertained than those balancing decisions. The main purpose of CR balancing before a session occurs is simply for you to have a general prediction on which encounters might be more difficult or easier than you expect. Ultimately, that is the only purpose. Having a quote-unquote well-balanced encounter is no guarantee that it's going to be fun. It's not a sign that you've done it sort of quote-unquote correctly, because the only correct encounter or scene is the one that the group enjoyed. Or that the group remembers, or possibly and hopefully both. It is simply a tool for you to test in advance, is this in the realm of difficulty that I want it to be for the sake of the story? And again, stories have scenes, and you're creating scenes. So don't get caught up on, I want a medium, a hard, or an easy encounter here. Instead, think, what feels right for the story? Is this meant to be terrifying? Well, then that will probably lead you to a hard encounter. Rather than deciding in the abstract, I want a hard encounter, and then sort of be in search for a story. Start with story, and then have encounter difficulties that match your story. I've given advice before too, if a scene starts not playing out the way you expected, course correct on the fly. That can mean changing how the NPCs and monsters make their decisions. It can also mean you decide the creature has more or fewer hit points than you might have planned originally. You also have a whole range of damage possibilities for them. If you're using the average damage in their stat block, remember you can go higher or lower than that, because the average damage printed in a monster stat block is exactly that. It is the average. You have in parentheses the die expression, which shows you the full range of damage possibilities that creature could be dishing out. All of this is a many-part way of saying one simple thing, and that is DM, you have all sorts of tools at your disposal to fine-tune not only during your prep, but even more importantly, on the spot, because no amount of preparation is going to prepare you for the decisions that the players make. And it's also not going to prepare you for something that to me is even more important. And that is seeing in the moment what they are enjoying. I have dropped plans on the spot when I start reading what people are enjoying. And I am shameless about leaning into what is exciting them or scaring them. I mean, I've done this even on the Acquisitions Incorporated stage. I have dropped and again, it's not visible, but I've just like tossed part of my prep when I'm like, oh, this is what the players are really glomming onto, so I'm just going to, more of that.
Right, and which is a subtle but very important skill for the dungeon master, is reading the room, reading the table, and going from there.
Yeah, and so I would say, going back to the question, encounter balance is just one of many tools in creating a great scene, and start again thinking about scenes. And a scene may or may not include combat, and if it does, figuring out what is the difficulty of the encounter in advance is a way for you, again, to prepare yourself for the likely difficulty of that encounter. But otherwise, focus on cool locations, funny things the characters say, villains who monologue and give away more than they should, interesting things happening in the environment. Remember, in your D&D world, there's weather. Like, I bring that up just as one of many examples I could bring up, but I'm always astounded the number of times DMs forget there's weather and how much weather can actually affect how people behave in the real world, and then imagine how it would affect people in D&D. Like, you can take an encounter that's a sunny day on the King's Road in the forest. Almost every DM has run some version of there's an encounter on a road in an idyllic forest.
Yes.
Take that same encounter, but there's a downpour. And there's mud flowing on either side of that dirt track that they're on. That alone just changed the whole encounter. Throw in some lightning that's hitting that might end up striking close by the location of the encounter. Well, this is now starting to get even juicier.
Right. I'm in my metal armor. What the hell do I do now?
So remember, DM, you have tools that go way beyond stat blocks and CRs.
Hey, there you go. And we have hit 2 o'clock on the nose, exactly. So, as always, thanks to everyone for spending an hour out of your day with us. Congratulations to our winner of our Unpainted Kraken. Thanks to everyone who put in a question. There were a lot of them, and really good ones. We will be collecting those. We'll be writing them down, getting them going for our next Design Plus live stream. Thanks as always to our followers, subscribers, and of course to our moderators as well. And we're going to kick it on over to Heroes of the Veil. So, and of course, thanks to Jeremy for spending an hour out of your day with us, answering a whole slew of questions.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for watching.
I did this wrong last time, so we're going to see if
Let's
I can actually hit the end screen. See, I queued it up, but now I have to hit it again.
But we're still on the air.